Welcome back to the show. My name's K Schott, and we're about to learn the secret sauce.
Yeah, so do you want to introduce yourself and just tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name's K Schott. I work on a project called Astro, but have been involved in open source for a long time. And so it's a thing I really care about and love that you're doing this show.
Yeah, and I'd love to just list out your resume of open source.
Well, then it sounds like a no man's land of abandoned projects.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of open source is that they'll be not archived, but this in SEO land for forever.
Right.
So because of this show, someone will find an old project of yours. So
yes, to anyone, create a PR in some old repo. Like, be the first person to touch it in 5 years.
Yeah. Man, I've got some of those projects.
Sure.
Like people ping me. I just got a project from a year and a half ago that I just built and left, and they're like, "Hey, there's an error, and can you help me with this?" And I'm like, "Can you open an issue?" He's like, "Oh yeah, sorry, it's first time."
Yeah.
And what's funny because when I first did my first contribution to open source project, I actually emailed the maintainer the same way this person did to me because I didn't know how to use GitHub.
Like, didn't have an account.
No, I had an account. Like, I found the repo, but I didn't know about issues.
Yeah.
Because at the company I work for, my first junior developer job, we used Jira for everything.
Right.
Like, everything. So we never open up issues. And I was like, oh, issues. Oh, I've heard about these.
Right.
It's like, that's so cool. But anyway, going back to your resume, so Node.js, you made contributions there in the past?
I might have one PR, but it was probably like docs to Node.js. But that was like...
It counts.
Yeah, when I started, like, Node.js was really coming on the scene, so I was lucky enough to be at a company called Box at the time.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Right in the South Bay, yeah. Right in the South Bay, there was this, like, Yahoo, Box, and, I'm like PayPal, I guess, were, like, all looking at Node.js, and I was lucky enough to be a part of that conversation very early in my career.
Yeah, I always think of Walmart as my introduction to Node.js because they were on the speaker circuit, like on podcasts, talking about how they did a Black Friday site using Node.js.
Yeah, well, we always had a chip on our shoulder because we realized, like, oh, they've been doing this for a while now. Like, maybe, a while is like probably a year or two, but like we were like a little late to the party when you looked at, they were early.
Okay, what other projects did you choose to open source?
I joined a bunch of projects just kind of by like using something maybe at work or like in a personal project and like doing that thing where I just kind of went way too deep. So
yeah.
If anyone remembers the request package was like number 4 in the whole NPM ecosystem.
Okay.
Because there was no fetch, there was no Axios or any of those. Like, request was just this like best way to make a request, and it was very cool. So Michael Rogers is like a really awesome open source kind of old guard person, just has been around for a while, and I learned a lot from him through that project.
Yeah, he's good people. I've met him at Waffle.js just around the corner, and so where this is being recorded across the street, it used to be like a barbecue place, and Dogpatch.js was there a few times. Okay. And I only know Dogpatch.js since it was over there, but it's not around anymore.
You asked me earlier if I'd been to Dogpatch.js. I lied. I haven't. I've been to Waffle.js.
Oh, man.
Oh,
all right,
sorry.
Well, let's end the show. No, Waffle.js also. I met him for the first time at Waffle.js, as well as everybody else who I've met.
Yeah, that was a cool.
In the Noe ecosystem.
Free waffles. Or not free, but waffles.
Yeah, did you go when it was Donut.js?
Maybe. No, I think it was waffles. I think it was squarely waffles.
Okay, towards the end, like 2019, they switched to donuts because they needed something vegan friendly, and the waffles weren't vegan friendly.
I've had vegan waffles and they're not good. So yeah. I'm sure that I
think it's like
that decision.
Buckwheat flour. Anyway, we don't have to go into waffle talk. We've done a bit of open source. You contributed, but I want to talk about what you're working on right now. What you're working on Astro. Yeah. Astro.build, that's actual URL. Yep. And so what is Astro?
Astro is a really cool way to build websites. So kind of unique from Next.js and SvelteKit and all the kind of like cool JavaScripty frameworks. We're really focused on like content sites. So if your site is mainly about getting content like to the user as quickly as possible, that's like our bread and butter. So we get to make a lot of decisions because we're optimizing on that. Not so much on like building full dashboards and apps and really stateful things like you're building a blog, a marketing site, an e-commerce site even. Yeah. Like that's our bread and butter. So it's a cool way to like make trade-offs that no one else is really doing right now around performance, developer experience.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
Yeah, and it's like it's a space where, so when I got into actual...
Space. Astro.
Yeah, it is space. Excellent.
Sorry.
You're looking for your tagline. That might be it. Space it is. But Yeah, so like I came from a time where I had an iPod, listened to tons of podcasts. Squarespace is another space.
Is a sponsor of this show?
Yeah, I don't. It could be Squarespace. Reach out. Oh, it could be sponsored by Astro. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Maybe.
But yeah, so Squarespace was like my introduction to building websites again, because in high school I built like Dreamweaver sites, and that was like we learned literally in high school. We had a web design class. I lucked out that we actually had that in our curriculum, and so I built a bunch of Dreamweaver sites, learned that, toyed around with ActionScript, learned JavaScript sort of, like how to copy and paste to do stuff. But really, I got to the point where it's like jQuery. But what I'm getting at is like Squarespace became the introduction to like me getting back into building websites. Okay. WordPress also, it was in college. It was like the go-to if I wanted to create a blog, because that's what if you want to make content on the internet, a blog was needed. So I'm thinking like Astro, y'all have like, there's a space there for being the gateway into, and actually we had a podcast episode. I think we went into detail on this, on like people are now learning how to code and build websites on ways that we had to like, we had to like sticks and stones and like, and rocks.
There was a magic to that, like just being able to do whatever you wanted versus now it's like I create your like JSX file, that's your app, and then like you need a state machine already, like a state service, and yeah, like the sticks and stones were pretty fun.
Yeah, and so I have a site, hotopenSauce.pizza. It got started in Astro. We've since moved to React and Vite, so we
How could you do that to me?
we did way too much like JavaScript at the point. But the thing is that we got the thing up and running in about a couple days through open source contributions, and primarily everybody who walked in was like, I tweeted out and said, hey, I'm building a project. Here's the design, because like I just knew how to do Tailwind. Yeah. So like here's the design. If anybody wants to contribute, like here's the proof. Like make a contribution. Yeah. Got on a plane to go back to Florida for the holidays, and I already had like someone built out the framework in Astro, nice. And it was React components, but then they just read a couple docs, and then got it all good together.
Well, so there's two cool things about Astro that like we hear that story a lot. Like we're even working with a design agency now on some new pages, and like they're like, we don't know Astro, but we know like HTML and CSS. It's like that is literally Astro is meant to be. Kind of the same way Svelte tries to be this, like a superset on top of HTML. So literally any HTML snippet is a valid Astro file. Like that's our whole component syntax. So you can like literally just be like, no, HTML on its own is fine. We will like handle that. And then if you want, you can opt into React components. It sounds like this person brought a bunch of React components into that. And we kind of, in a lot of ways where like a lot of projects will say, you're living in JavaScript, don't look at HTML. JavaScript makes HTML. It's bad, like it's this bad thing that we make. Instead, we like let you kind of blur the lines between them in a really interesting way where you can use both.
The flexibility and the way we approached it, like we were like adding in Vite after the fact, because does Astro run on Vite?
Yeah, we are internally powered by Vite.
Shout out to Vite. Very cool. Yes. Yeah, so it running on Vite, so we're like, hey, let's test it out, and we'll add Vite or create a branch. Like created a branch, like, oh, it actually works. And then when people were adding components, like I created a bunch of like pure Astro code, and that was all I did with like the guts. But then people were like, oh, let me just like sprinkle in a little bit of React component here. And I could see this where like in Svelte specifically, because you mentioned it, like it's really, really intuitive for animations. So if I wanted to like do like a spinner, or if I wanted to do like some random animation thing that I know how to do in JavaScript or in Svelte, I can just sprinkle. And then, which is like, that's what the jQuery, what the MO or the tagline, it wasn't what they said, but everybody would say, like, oh, just sprinkle in some jQuery, and then you've got a site.
So like there's a lot of value to that. And it doesn't have to be like literally writing like raw JavaScript in jQuery, which is what they did, and jQuery is awesome. But the new component model, like we're all thinking in components now. That's kind of the bet that Astro is saying, is like this component model is the thing that we like from the last 10 years. Let's let you sprinkle in components instead of random functions and side effects. Like sprinkle in your little React islands, we call them, or Svelte or Solid, whatever you want to use, and that's like that should be your page. The most of it is HTML, not necessarily you need to worry about hydrating and running and being super expensive on the client. So it's really fast.
What I like about it right now, and I didn't mean to go all those details in Astro, but I love for prototyping. So like I build this app all the time, working at GitHub, my former day job, and I build, like you log in with GitHub, it's just a button, you log in with GitHub, it tells you what user number you are. So based on the user ID, that's like your user.
I think I've used that.
Yeah.
I think I've used that before.
I built it a couple times, and like historically, since I've been working at this company. And in Astro, it's trivial to like have that sort of componentized to sort of talk to the JavaScript, get the return, or just hit the just fetch, like hit the API request, and you're good. And then when you use things like Netlify with their functions, now like you don't even have JavaScript just like natively in your components. It's now the functions powering it. You hit the actual HTTP request, and you find out your user number, and you're good. And so like my job previously in DevRel was always focused around how can I show something really quickly, but like build it on a Friday afternoon. So that's what I love about Astro.
Yeah, you could do that in Astro with like basically HTML template and then like a little bit of JavaScript at the top of your file. And it's like, these are all languages that we all know by having to learn them to do React or to do like, instead of getting started with like 8 different technologies, you're just getting started with the basics and then adding on throughout.
Yeah, and it's almost like you're going a different direction than most people are going, where you're just like, you have a framework like a Next or even like a Redwood where you just have everything, or Prisma is included in there and you got testing included in there. But with Astro, it's just like, if you have HTML templates or if you know how to do CSS, like you could be really, really dangerous.
Yeah. Well, our take is that like everything that we're doing is the platform. So what Next and Svelte and Redwood are all having to recreate across all of them is routing, like that basic like build output. And instead we can be that, but then you bring your Svelte or your React or whatever you want. The Vue component, like why are we building routing into the Vue component? In some ways it really helps, but in other ways it's like we're just recreating the best router for React, the best router for Svelte, the best router for every ecosystem.
Yeah, cool. So I wanted to take a step back because we got deep into space with Astro, but I want to talk about how we got to Astro, because you've had a couple different startups and open source projects up until this point. So can we start briefly at the Pika package and what that was? Because I know it was I know when it tweeted out, I think it was Jason Ektovich, who is still at GitHub. He had like dropped into like Slack, was like, hey, this looks very cool. Like you announced it. Oh, nice. And we're like, oh, okay, what is this? And that we had the question of like, what is it? Like we were trying to figure out what it was. So like, what was Pika Package?
So Pika unapologetically didn't know what it was. Like that was almost the point of Pika, was like, because you got to go back, that was like 2016, 2017. So like ESM at that point was even still, maybe not totally new, but like the idea of a browser supporting like the import statement or the export statement was like pretty revolutionary. So Pika's whole thing was like, this is going to be really cool. Let's figure out what it's going to look like. Yeah. And it was unapologetically just an umbrella for like cool experiments. Okay. So there was Pika Pack, which helped you build packages with an ESM focus. Pika Web became Snowpack, which is very Vite-like. The CDN became SkyPack. Like there's all these early seeds of ideas that we were really excited to explore through that project.
Okay, cool. And then so out of the ashes, you did focus on SkyPack and Snowpack. So like, how did that work? Because eventually you like rebranded the project publicly to Snowpack. Is that correct?
I think Pika, it was kind of like our like graduation, was that like, okay, this cool experimental phase is over. We think that there's something really cool here in the CDN. Like the idea that like the same way that we all use jQuery CDNs for jQuery, what if we did that for the whole NPM ecosystem? And this is still a good idea. If anyone wants to do this, I love the idea.
Is it still open source and like sitting there?
SkyPack was never open source. This was like the first thing of like, could there be a company powering this and pushing this idea forward? Okay. At this point, we probably should just open source. But there's a esm.sh is a new version of this, open source. It's really cool, doing what SkyPack did. So people are exploring the space still, but it was that idea of like, why wouldn't import React as a statement actually pull from a CDN? And like, there's no more npm install. It's all being streamed down from the web. It still is a really cool idea.
Okay, but it's a cool idea, but you're not working on it anymore, right?
It's a cool idea that is like still a little too early. Yeah. It turns out a lot of packages want to be built locally and there's just not tooling there for it yet. Yeah. Deno is doing a good job. Deno's really cool.
Deno,
so they're probably the leading like charge of this now.
Yeah, honestly, I've never talked to the Deno folks as of yet, and I would love to, like, if you're listening, reach out to me. But DMs are open. So I want to pause real quick and then like talk about the community that you were building around things like SkyPack and Snowpack. Is like, folks were using it, and they were using it for quite a bit of tooling. Like I think my Twitch bot still is powered by SkyPack.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
so it's pointing directly to something that's hosted on the CDN. So let me know if you ever take it down, because that thing is going to break.
Yeah, it's we're trying to figure out what to do with it now. There's a lot of good other options there that people are really working full time on it. So
Okay.
yeah, we should chat.
Yeah, very cool.
It's never going away. That's the nice thing. I mean, like that's a commitment. When you put a URL and say use this URL in production,
Yeah.
the URL's never going away. But
Yeah,
yeah,
unless you get acquired by Google.
yeah, I mean, I still would I will personally fund that project until I die, and then have like a contingency. I will
Yeah.
find robots to replace that.
Okay, cool. So now you're at Astro. So I saw the excitement of Astro on Twitter. Early 2021, like end of 2020, people were kind of like Astro this and Astro that, and like I want to build something in Astro. And like I was doing a lot of the streams on the GitHub stream on Twitch, Open Source Friday, and we would just talk about like what are cool projects that are you looking forward to in open source, and Astro would come up a lot. And so how did you make the decision to go from Snowpack, SkyPack to Astro?
So Snowpack, I mean, is a really quick story of it's a really cool technology, and then Vite just did it better. So
Yeah.
if you use Vite now, like, I'm not saying like we get no credit. They did a great job. They did a better job than we could, but
Yeah.
we saw them taking that story much further than we could. So that was a natural kind of, okay, you guys go do that.
But how do you decide to, like, in open source, stop? Like, I guess you had a business
Yeah.
behind it, so maybe you're just like, this is actually taking too many resources. Was that what you're?
No, it was a long. I think only like 2 weeks ago I actually put that like notice on the README. So it takes like open source takes a while to die, and I think it is like your responsibility as a maintainer to like if you're not looking at it, like put a notice somewhere. Don't. We still have people on our Discord being like, hey, like what's the best way? And like I wasn't really active there, and I never did a good job building too much of a community around it. So
Okay.
there's no one to really fill my shoes.
Yeah. I mean, if there's no community, it's kind of helpful because then it could die silently.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The notion of like knowing if a project is dead or is it active, if it's vibrant, it's actually what we're trying to do at Open Source. And like I want to walk into a project and find out like were there any contributions, which is funny because like if you look at Open Source right now, and I'll show you this too as well because so I pulled up Astro, but if you see Open Source, we've got a bus number of 1 for every repo.
A bust number?
A bus. So like if someone
bus.
someone
Gotcha.
got on a bus and never came back, that's the analogy.
Yeah, your bus factor.
Yeah, bus
right.
factor. So I'm the bus factor of 1 on the hot repo. Sure. And then my repo's been sitting open for the whole week, or sorry, my PR, and I only do 1 PR a week basically. But if I look at the other one, we've got 1 person contracting and helping on the flagship product, and also bus factor of 1. And I should probably grab screenshots of these in case we want to.
You should, but I mean, like, so Snowpack is a perfect version of this because if you look at Vite's bus factor, I'm sure, like, out of the gate, they had, like, it just seemed like a huge community because Evan has the Vue community. Like, there was just this huge, and Snowpack was always kind of.
Yeah, so we have, who's this person
I don't know.
making contributions? Yeah, and that's
exactly, yeah.
and that's the thing that
This is the graveyard view.
the graveyard. And that's the thing that I like about this is because like you can actually see actual folks in frequency, which like we can bump this up to 120 days to see if there's like more contribution. But at the end of the day, like I just want to walk in here and be like, can I make contribution? There's obviously 2 people I can reach out to. Yeah. If I'm like, hey, I need help, and I won't reach out to you because you're not writing code.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So that's super helpful for folks to walk into a project and be like, oh, here's a contribution, this is happening. And it's like the future is like we want to provide these insights of like what churn looks like, what contribution looks like. And then for project maintainers, like you can open up these dashboards and be like, oh, we're slowing down. Like we could probably do some engagement or get some reviews or whatever. So what I'm getting at is talking about community in Snowpack, but Astro, like how is the community maintained today?
So we all kind of as like the core made it. So the nice thing about having that time to work on SkyPack was we also built a team at the company that could kind of work full time. So coming out of the gate at Astro, we had basically a full-time effort to build this project and take everything we learned from SkyPack and Snowpack and really wanted to do it right this time. So Snowpack had been like a lot of weight on my shoulders so that if I moved away, like really inconsistent contribution. And Astro was like really just like super consistent. Like we were all in the Discord every day and had this kind of cool like hacker mentality of like, you couldn't even join our Discord unless you opened up your console log, I think, on the main website. It was
Wait,
like,
how did that work?
you had to open up your DevTools and look at the console log, and there was a link to our Discord there. There was no button on our site.
Oh, so is this sort of like what do you call it, speakeasy?
Yeah, a little bit of that vibe of like, the people who got there were like excited to have found it. Like, and we were excited
Yeah.
like, oh my God, people are actually looking. There was like a little message.
Was that intentional though?
Yeah, I think we knew it was early.
Okay.
We knew it was too early to like make a big deal about it because we were still trying to figure out what it was. And so it was kind of like, if someone finds the site, like here's a little bit of like, not a manifesto, but like a couple paragraphs about what we're trying to do. And if that speaks to them and they find our Discord, like we want them to be here because we want their feedback, we want their energy.
Yeah.
And it's all grown from that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because like most of open source, like you think and I don't think this is actually true, but most people think, oh yeah, get tons of stars, tons of forks, I guess, I don't know, or hearts. It's honestly, most people don't really think about contributions. Like when you have like the rah, like I'm gonna write code or I'm gonna make contributions this month. It's very like, it's transitory. Like where I'm here for the minute, but I'll never be back. And what I love about like even tools like Orbit, like you can connect with your community and know what's happened and sort of stay connected, hopefully stay connected. So.
And there's even something about like that, like people come in and then they leave. Like open source it's people are here because they want to be. Like there's no one like, besides the core staff that we have now because we've been lucky enough to raise money to support the project, like everyone who's in that community other than us is there because it's a community, it's there because, it's work that they are able to like bring responsibility into and get responsibility out of. That was like my first projects I've ever worked on. I really enjoyed that sense of like ownership. Like, I think I might have mentioned this when we were chatting last time, like being like some junior developer at a company where you're like the bottom rung and then you like close your work laptop, open up your personal laptop, and now I'm like lead maintainer of the request package number 3 on all of NPM. Like it was a lot of just I don't know, I really love that feeling and I've tried to recreate that as much as possible in this community. Yeah,
I mean, it's wild you bring that up because like in open source, I mean, there's a barrier of entry where you kind of have to know like where to find a Discord link if it's hidden somewhere. But it is some sort of like, there's no rules. Like there's no rules for how do you maintain, how do you draw a community, how do you contribute, how do you cut releases, but people figure it out as they go along. And I think if you spend enough as like sort of apprentice, like you mentioned earlier, Michael Rogers, like showing you the ropes, like you learn enough that you're like, oh, this is how you cut releases. This is why NPM is so popular.
It was all cargo culted, like, there was no book on any of this.
Yeah, and honestly, like, it'd be great to have a book, but I just don't know if that book would be useful.
Yeah, I mean, anyone can like, that's the thing, like, if you, I don't know, like, the contribution I have, like, of open source has been so rewarding for my career, not just because I ended up making a career out of it, but, like, you learn so much faster. Like in work, I don't know, like in my work, I was always like, I felt like there were a lot of like structure in place. And this was really unstructured. Like you can kind of be a jerk in open source and then people will tell you like, you'll either feel that you're not getting like progress and you realize that you're the reason. Like maybe you chose a bad project, maybe there's bad maintainers, but like I always was like, I think I learned a lot more about how to work with people through open source because everyone was just there because they wanted to be. So people are really quick to be like, kind of choose decisions that aren't about making you feel better or like will be kind of quick to be like, hey, like that's not the right way to communicate this like to a team of people who are there for fun, not because your ego's involved now. I mean it is the sort of cargo cult, like you figure it out as you go along and like there's so much value in mentorship and like the thing I've always been considerate of is like I have a very strong diverse community that follows me around the stuff I do. And I'm constantly trying to introduce them to other communities. And like what open source has always been, it's been the centrifuge of like, okay, you really want to make open source contributions? Like we don't have much here for you, but like we're gonna kick you back out to other folks. That's cool.
And other projects. Because like things like this, what we're doing here, we're making that connection so that like we're just gonna pay attention to releases and your insights and then be like, oh, you know what? You know who's actually done a good job? Astro. Like they've got this issue. And it was a thing that we actually came to the point where it was a point really where I had to decide, is this going to be a serious VC funded back project or are we always just going to have like fun side projects? We have day jobs. And that was a point where we decided to go like this way or that way with the hot open sauce pizza project. And we had specific contributions that we wanted to make back upstream to Astro. And I had to make the decision of like, okay, should I do this now or should I go talk to VCs? And what was great is that I had a community to have this conversation with, and they're like, well, what's your bandwidth? Like, you're making contributions, and at the time, 2 of my biggest contributors took full-time jobs at really, really good companies. And I'm like, Yeah, I'm gonna need like people to help me out more regularly.
Yeah.
Because it's great having the folks who worked with me for 6 months and built out what I have today. But at the end of the day, like I'm converted one contributor into someone who's working with me full time. Well, currently part time. He'll be full time in the future, and I've got a whole list of other folks that I'm gonna convert into like community and engagement and stuff like that. So, yeah, congrats.
It's an exciting part. I mean, that's like, I feel like I had a really good thing to say here, and I've just lost it. Maybe it wasn't that good.
Man, that was a good, profound statement.
Yeah, can we cut that? Edit in just philosophy.
We'll just freeze it in the edit and like just dub it over.
I guess it's lost. Oh no, what I was gonna say. Okay, we can fix this in post. We went really early on an RFC process, which I think is a pretty, maybe not revolutionary, but like this idea of even if we were pitching ideas to each other as like the core maintainers of this project. So like there's about 5 of us now that are like core maintainers, and like essentially like trying to have like a technical steering committee idea of like these are the people who are like really know the code base and really kind of, if it comes to it, can make a final call on decisions. But we're not just like in a secret room on Discord making decisions and then pushing PRs. Like there's this whole RFC process which we've like documented, standardized, and we all have to go through ourselves to get anything through. And I think that's been really helpful because I'll have bad ideas. Like I get a ton of feedback through that process where I could have gone much quicker and just done a PR and like maybe even a commit to main like in the early days.
Yeah.
But pretty early on, maybe like a couple of months in, we had adopted this process that it's gotten more formal as time's gone on, but I find it really useful to have you can't pass go, you can't collect $200. Like you got to go through the steps and get feedback.
Yeah. Where'd you get the RFC process from? How did you develop it?
More cargo culting. I think we borrowed most heavily from Vue's, but Vue is based theirs on React. I think React is theirs on Rust. Like there's this whole like, it's
folks are learning from each other.
Yeah.
And I find that with so I learned Ruby on Rails was my first framework. Ruby was my first language, and I've seen so much like the term cargo culting that you've used a lot, and like maybe we did titles something cargo culting, but basically a lot of the Rails community have split off to go do other projects, and that same success that they saw in the early days, like the mid 2000s and early 2010s, is now repeated. So like things like Prisma's ORM service and like the sort of connecting directly to your MySQL, your Postgres, like that is very much a Railsy way to approach it.
Right. Oh, interesting.
And I've talked to Johannes a couple times about it. I can't remember if he was a Rails dev back in the day, but he's done a couple startups and projects and prolific at open source. But like you just go borrow from.
Yeah.
Like so it was kind of like what you've been doing with like Pika Package and Skypack. You borrow from the success, and then you've been building what you have today.
Yeah, I mean, Pika is like what was Snowpack. The whole thing was like, Webpack has done a great job leading us through the last 10 years, and now it's time for something new. But that only can happen because Webpack existed. So we were always in this place where I think we were like maybe a little meaner to Webpack than we should have been, but it was always from a place of like just total respect that like web development has gone to this place where the NPM, there's 1 million packages. Like how cool is that? But then we were like kind of like a little bit, I don't know, we were kind of the rebellious group.
Yeah.
Rails, I'll just say like, because Rails is actually, I don't know if this is a point you meant to make, but I'm going to take it and spin into my point.
I'll go for it.
DHH will just like push stuff to Rails. Like I think they just added Tailwind because DHH was like, I want to add Tailwind, and now like Tailwind is built into Rails. Like
really,
or something.
It's like a template.
I'm sorry.
It might be like it's like jQuery was like default as well.
Yeah.
So it was like a template.
So it's the gift and the curse where like maybe that's the right call. In which case like wow that happened quickly, and like maybe it wouldn't have happened. Maybe an RFC process would have stopped it. Yeah. But like also maybe it's the wrong call, and there's no one to say that was the wrong call. Yeah. So it's I don't know. There actually isn't really a right answer. Like there's just 2 different ways of doing things.
But I wanted to also talk about this sort of rising for the ashes and talk about growing community, because that's what I want to title this episode.
Not Rails and what DHH
not
does.
DHH does push directly to the main branch.
Pushing to main is bad ?
But would you say the way you've grown, what your community exists today, is by having the core group of folks that you sort of discovered that showed up, that actually went through the hoops to sort of show up?
Well, so it's a weird kind of, I don't know what the word is, but like it's both, that's like super true and also super incorrect, which is that, I don't know why that sounded so mean. No, you're right. It's
your story.
The Astro community couldn't have grown without that natural, just kind of like, it's slowly grown. And I think we've created new processes as we've grown. We've changed our channels around like 1,000 times. Like, we couldn't have jumped to the size we are now, and like that just never would have happened. The people who we started with are probably the minority, if not like completely removed. There's really one or two people from like the early like first 6 months who were still hanging around. I think that's that natural ebb flow where like because people are there because they want to be, like I don't still work on the request package. Like it was really cool for a time for me, but then my interest changed, my kind of time changed, and I stopped supporting it. So again, it's the push-pull of open source, which is just that like people are there because they want to be, and you have to be okay with people being excited about your project, wanting to contribute, but then naturally interest change, and that's a part of it.
So going back to Johannes, I just talked to him not too long ago, and we were chatting around. He thinks of himself as a really good starter, like a good idea person, get a project off the ground. And I'm also very similar. I can get a project off the ground, but I'm horrible at maintenance and horrible at like, cleaning up stuff. And like, I could do operations, but I know very quickly I need to find someone else to do that for me. So like all my projects, if someone picks it up and wants to be like my number two, in the project and like keeping it going, like, oh, this is so good. Otherwise it's like, oh, I forgot I shipped code over there. Yeah. So until somebody asked a question. So it's also like kind of understanding like the personas. Because like if someone's really good at like, hey, I can actually implement Vite for this project for you, or I know how to write test, or whatever the thing is, like people, if they understand their skill set up front, they could provide that value. And like when the job's done, like, and they could learn a new skill or move on. Yeah.
It's hard finding like, and I've been in this spot, like how can I contribute? Like I just want to contribute. I love this project. I want to contribute. How can I do that? Like it's hard for me to answer that question sometimes because it's like, there are things we want, but like, I don't even know how to describe like and that maybe a roadmap would help here, but like that idea of like, how do you support someone who comes in and they just want to help, but they need direction? Other than like, here's a bug or a good issue, it's like, how do I actually bring someone in to feel the ownership, to feel like they can actually make progress and are contributing value? It's a really hard, I don't know if anyone's really solved that super well.
Yeah, how big is Astro today? Like full-time employees?
Astro, so we make the distinction. There's Astro, the open source project. We have about 20 maintainers, 5 core maintainers, and a huge community. And then the Astro technology company was founded in January of this year, but really came from Skypack, and that is currently at 6.
At 6? Okay, interesting. So are the maintainers contracting, getting paid or anything like that, or are they just...
Yeah, everyone of that 6 full-time, and we bring people in from our community. If like there's, Sarah is an amazing technical writer who came into our community, and we now contract with her to help improve our docs. If you've seen our doc site now versus like 2 months ago, very different. So she's been doing a great job leading that project.
Yeah, how did you connect with Sarah?
Sarah found our project. Yeah, Sarah came in, I think wanted to use it for something, and then again, like it's just a fun, I don't want to speak too much of like, our community is really fun. Like we do a good job of doing events every week. We are super, I think something that I did really wrong in Snowpack was I would just leave the community for like weeks. Like, because I wanted to work on something else. Like I only had so many hours in the day, and coming into Astro, we've really tried to be much more like consistent and just available and present. So having fun in the community with our people who are there by choice, because we want that to be a fun environment versus I've seen plenty of just like abandoned Discords or Discords that don't really have the people working on the project. It's more like a fan club. Yeah. I think you can kind of bring people together much more, but you have to be present. You have to be consistent.
Yeah, that's interesting too as well. You mentioned events. Y'all do pizza parties?
No, yeah, pizza parties, slumber parties, camping trips. No, we're trying to do more. What we do every week really consistently is a community RFC call. So that RFC process I mentioned where we actually work through ideas, trying to combine that with also just like if you have something you want to talk about, an idea, you want to get help, like trying to leave a little space at the end to like just totally be about our community.
Okay.
There's a couple of people in our community, like Ben Holmes, who I think you've had on your show.
Yeah.
Is awesome. He is doing a weekly live stream, mostly about Astro. Fuzzy Bear is a member of our Discord. Great name. He does like This Week in Astro, which is mainly in our Discord. So there's a ton of just like cool things happening.
How do they do that in the Discord? Is it like audio only?
Yeah, we have a public audio video channel, so people can jump in, record their screen.
Genius.
Yeah.
And it's like having that sort of platform for folks to not promote themselves, but promote the work they're doing. Because sometimes people can come to me for a lot of stuff in my community and be like, oh, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, or I want to write a blog post. Like, write the blog post. Yeah. Like, let me review it. I'll give you all the tips and tricks. Because like, we went for the flagship product for opensource, switched from Webpack to Vite, and the project's been around since 2016. So like we've done every flavor of Rails since then. Or Rails, every flavor of React is a Freudian slip. Yeah, we'll convert to Rails pretty soon.
Yeah, the React to Rails conversion is going strong.
But yeah, every flavor of React, between like higher order components to now using hooks to now we use style components, so that's been the constant of our project so far. But someone converted it to the V, and they're like, I just want to try this out. And I'm like, well, could you also like they did a really good PR. And in the description, I was like, "Yeah, you're like halfway to a blog post. Could you like make this a blog post?"
Yeah.
And so he did that. And
again, signals from the director.
I don't know why I just thumbs up, but yeah, So he did that, and he wrote a 4-part series of a blog post, and it's like the series that one of the guys who works on Vitest, or I think it's Vitest, and however you say it.
Vite.
I did talk to Evan. He said it was Vite because it's a French word. And view is actually a French word, but they don't use their pronunciation.
Oh.
Yeah.
I never understood. I thought literally just the letter V. I don't know, another V word?
No, yeah, they're both,
Makes a lot of sense.
Both V words
I'm so embarrassed.
are French words. But so the person who maintains, one of the maintainers on Vitest, points to that article series as like how to convert from Webpack because no one did it. Yeah. Like everybody was really excited. And most people, what they do with new technology is they just greenfield it. Yeah. And we went through the process, I was like, oh, sure, it's a side project. Converted to V, and like we loved the fact that we did that because like we basically like checked the box for like future proofing the application, and now we have a blog series.
Even what you just said about like we haven't figured that out. That like so much of open source contributions are push. Like the person wants to contribute, and then they either figure it out themselves. They just do a PR because there's no community to kind of pull them in. We don't have a really good way to. I don't know how to do pull. I don't know if anyone's really figured this out. Of like. You saw in that moment, like, hey, this is almost like, I'm going to pull you to do the next thing.
Yeah.
If you want, like, you don't have to. Everyone's here because they want to be. But, like, if you want to do this would be really cool. And, like, you're now adding energy to their work. They're bringing energy. Like, it's hard because it's so hard to repeat because there's no one size fits all there. There's no formula, I don't think.
Yeah. But. Yeah, and that same engineer who did that contribution in the blog post also got pulled in to start doing some live streams with one of the staff engineers at Netlify. Okay. And then also got their full-time job, which is also, like, it's just a pathway of like, hey, I know how this works. Yeah. I don't have the time to do this. I did this. This is how I got my job and my career. Like, it's just an amazing pathway. And I would love to document like that kind of stuff for folks to sort of walk into projects and be like, oh yeah, this is how I can become an open source maintainer.
Oh my God, it was the best thing I ever did for my own resume. Not because it was like this cool thing that has a brand name that people know, but more like you can look at my GitHub profile. It's not just green squares. It's like, you can see me working through a project. Like, you don't need to like maybe you should still interview me, but like, you can see how I communicate. You can see how I work with people. You can see how I respond to feedback and take feedback. Like, it's not even about the green square at that point. It's about you see me at like doing work. You see me doing engineering work. You can get a peek into my life if I joined your company. And that was what I always thought I could kind of communicate with that work.
I love it. That's why we're more than green squares at open source.
Just a little layup and then got it.
Yeah, I just totally dunked that one. Yeah. Anyway, I started laughing at the end, so I probably ruined that clip, but your clip would have been awesome. So I want to wind down too as well, and like let's talk about like how folks can get involved in Astro, how they can use it. So like what are places that people can find those sort of hooks into your community? Yeah,
our Discord is no longer hidden. It is very visible, and we are very excited to have anyone. I think we're at 4,000 members and really trying to grow that. So Discord is, everything's on our homepage, astro.build. But our GitHub has a bunch of, we really try to document everything. So there's a governance process, there's a kind of getting started, there's all these ways that you can contribute. I'd say like not even through development. Like I'd say most people actually come in, the majority are looking for things around the edges. So ecosystem, ESLint, prettier, like things around the edges. And our doc site is getting a ton of love because again, it's not about building like, I need to know the Astro code base to build this. It's like, I need to know how to build a site with Astro. And there's a ton of amazing contributions happening in our doc site. So
excellent.
There's something for everybody. It's a really fun community. I'm really happy to be a part of it just myself and really proud of what we built.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for chatting with us.
Astro V1 coming June 8th.
So you heard it first here. Let's get saucing.